Welcome to Data in Chief, brought to you by Action. Join us as we explore compelling data stories, share analytic breakthroughs, and hear from leaders leveraging data to make a difference.
Well, I am here today with Adam Burns so that we can talk about our experience with the Data Universe Conference. The very first one, it happened in 2024. It's been a few weeks now, so I've had some time to reflect. Adam, hopefully you've had some time to reflect on that. So you're here because I just really wanted to hear your thoughts as someone who was the tech editor for this conference. You talked with a lot of people who attended the conference. You did the Data Universe podcast leading up to things. You hosted some discussions. So I have my perspective, you have yours, and I hope we can just share that back and forth today to give some people some idea of what this conference was about and what we can learn from it and what we can look forward to in the world of data analytics. So, Adam, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Robert. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Yeah. So first, I want to talk about what this conference was about. It's something that maybe some people in my circles haven't heard of before because it's brand new. Um, my impression of this um, was that this is a different kind of conference than what I'm used to. First of all, I noticed it when I was just coming across some social feeds and things. This thing was advertised, and I saw that there was a conference manifesto, a very visionary kind of thing put out there before anybody had even registered. And then when I heard all the keynote speakers and all the sessions, it occurred to me that this really is a conference full of visionaries looking towards the future of data. And of course, that's going to be heavily focused on AI because that's the moment that we're in. People talked about a lot of other things as well, economics and open source platforms and things like that. So my sense was this was a group of people really thinking deeply about the future. This was not a conference about people trying to sell stuff, either their products or their services. There was some of that. There were vendors. But even among those vendors, I felt like the sense was the people there in a sales capacity were also trying to think about and set themselves up for the future. Now, you interviewed a lot of people. You made the rounds with this conference. What is your sense of what this thing was all about and what kind of people were there?
Well, for number one, I think, Robert, you nailed it, really. I think that's right. Alistair Kroll should take a lot of credit for that. He was the guy that put together all the keynotes and put together the manifesto, and the team at RX for kind of trying to build out that sort of event. I found it fascinating. I thought there was a good and interesting group of people there. There were 6 stages dealing with everything, as you point out, from kind of business ethics to the actual nuts and bolts of everything, which meant that you had a good group, a good sort of disparate spread of the audience, which I thought made for interesting questions. It made for engagement. It made for people who were kind of really sort of active and wanted to learn. So I got 5 themes out of it, 5 things, one of which absolutely kind of coincides with what you were talking about, which is where it's all going. Alistair kind of focused on that. The keynotes focused on that. Number 2 was bringing people on the journey with you. I think people seemed to be really aware of the kind of bimodal development of a lot of technology and how they didn't want that to happen with AI and with data, and how important it was that the company was there. Then, which I thought was in conflict with that, was this sort of theme of a user base of one, which hopefully we can go on to explore a little bit later, because you have a distinct advantage over me on that one because you're American, and I'm really curious to know what you think about it. Number 4 was data privacy and governance, which sounds a bit dry, but actually I thought was potentially the key to the whole thing. And number 5 was warning signs. And there were quite a few. It was a very positive conference. It was a very positive event. There was a lot of looking forward. There was a lot of let's get everybody together and move this thing on. But there were some shots across the bow, and happy
Yeah.
to kind of pull those out as well.
Yeah, for sure. One of the big reasons that this idea really resonated with me is just observing historical patterns in how computing has developed in different ways over different eras and different periods of technological advancement, and just taking that historical trajectory to predict what's next. And Alistair talked about the difference between, kind of the cycle back and forth between core computing and edge computing, starting with IT controlled, and then developer controlled, and then workload controlled, and now finally user controlled, which right now, the user controlled things, Chat GPT, OpenAI, whatever kind of AI sort of platform you're talking about, that's a user asking a question and interacting with something, but it's still based on a core computing model. And you talked about personalization, a user base of one, and his prediction was that it's going to go from that core computing, cloud computing, AI stuff into something more personalized. And I think just that prediction based on historical trends is spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was funny enough because literally just before I jumped on this to talk with you, I was watching. I don't know if you've seen it on, which is going to date this, I guess. Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn was talking to Reid AI. So he's trained his own AI. It's read everything Reid's ever written, and he was just having a conversation effectively with himself. And which is the ultimate kind of personalization. Can you get any more personal than talking to yourself? But at the same time, it had that sort of sense of I think it's called Uberos, or Uberos or something like that, the snake that's eating itself. And I thought we can't surely have got to that stage already. And one of the warning shots that people fired was stop giving AI all the fun stuff to do. And I do think that's worth bearing in mind. Dr. Seth Dobrin from Quantum AI was talking about why all the hype around AI now, when big companies have been getting value from AI for about 20 years. And he said AI and generative AI could add $18 trillion to the global economy by 2030, which is a 40% increase. And you look at sort of where we are, coming out of the recession, coming out of COVID, coming out of those things. So you can understand why everybody's behind this and everybody's excited about it. And that gives you that kind of, that momentum. Alistair Kroll described it as a consciousness upgrade of historic proportions. So then you've got the story on top, haven't you? And it's romantic and it's sci-fi and it's everything that everybody loves. And he said, one sense of where this might all be going, he said, anything harder to use than AI will be used by AI. Now that I found fascinating, and I'm curious, Robert, as to what you think about that.
Oh, I think so many things about that. You mentioned something a minute ago that I was just like, yes. And it was something that Jana Eggers had mentioned in her keynote that I just really resonated with about AI is doing the fun stuff. But why is it doing the fun stuff? And the fun stuff being creating art, creating music, the stuff that we typically assign to the humanities, right? Not to AI. So it's making images, it's doing all this kind of generative stuff, writing stories, and so on and so forth. But the reason that it's doing the fun stuff and not the serious stuff is because it's not yet trusted to do the serious stuff. And what we hope that it can do is the hard stuff, like just file cleanup, like database cleanup, to let it be our sort of janitor, so to speak, of all this data that we're collecting. It's the hard stuff, and it's not fun. And the reason that it's hard, I think, comes down to economics. It's just really hard to justify a data engineer's time to just do a lot of cleanup for stuff that's still fairly cheap to store. Um, but yeah, that was one of those keynotes that I just thought, yeah, exactly. Right now, AI is fun and exciting, but when are we going to let it start doing the serious stuff?
And I wonder if because we're training it on, we're giving it the fun stuff, not the serious stuff. It is that more indicative of the way that we sort of that we view the fun stuff in life. That the words or whatever the words are, the pictures or whatever the pictures are. It's the business that's important. So we don't
Yeah.
trust it with the business. But maybe, as you say, if it starts doing the nitty gritty stuff, actually that will add enormous value to people. But I wonder if there is a fear there when you talk to people about will AI replace jobs. There's this notion. No, it will augment. It will help. It will free you up to add the layers of humanity on top to be better. But I wonder if we worry a little bit about what those layers of humanity might be, and that actually, if it does take care of the data cleanup, what really else is there to be done?
Well, I think to answer that, I'll go back to one of the points you made about bringing other people on the data journey with you. Okay. So, um, the data cleanup side of things, I think, can go into a long technical discussion about semantic layers. And one of the things that I observed about the conference is that the people there who were selling their technology ideas all decided that the foundation of their solution is some kind of semantic knowledge about people's data that says, okay, what I want to do is as we're having these conversations with an AI chatbot or with each other, um, I can interpret your intent, but then translate that to something trusted, a trusted layer that we all agree upon, that we've all defined together. Um, just moving language, right? It's all about language. How do we interact with each other? How do we bring other people together to collaborate with data analysis? It's by having a common language. And how do we have a common language? We have a semantic layer that translates something between an AI enabled interface and the data that we store. So that was a really big theme that I noticed in the vendors and some of the conversations out there. I also wanted to get your thoughts on the economics of it all, because there was one speaker, Doug Laney, who I think is maybe people don't know his name, but they know about the term that he had coined about big data: volume, velocity, and variety, the 3 V's of big data. He was the one that was involved in coming up with that description of what is big data. Um, and he had some really great points about why data is not the new oil. But something that I just really appreciated from that keynote and other conversations was just a lot of thought and deep conversation about um, what are the economics behind all of this. And talks about replacing people's jobs versus just making your job more efficient. What are your observations from talking with people and listening to everyone there?
Well, I think that's right. He said he wants to stop being the 3 V's guy and becoming the M's guy, didn't he? Wants to talk about data management, data monetization. I think, again, just looking back at notes, he said there are similarities, between data and oil. They're mined, refined, stored, pipe or plumb where it's needed. We can access in various ways, blah, blah, blah. But the important difference is that when we consume a drop of oil, it's gone. We can only consume it once. Data we can consume multiple times. It's a non-depleting asset. And that kind of sat actually very much at the core of what he was talking about, which is why aren't you monetizing this correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do, I think his phrase, which I loved, was, I'm pretty certain it was something along the lines of businesses account more for their office furniture than they do for their data.
That's
Because
right.
naturally, it's a line in your sheet, so you account for it. Whereas data sort of isn't yet. And his whole point was
Right.
you need to start thinking of it. Data is an asset. It meets the criteria of an
Yep.
asset. And so you need to start, think about it. His points were data savvy organizations have a market value average 2x from standard ones. Data product orgs market value 3x. He said data monetization is a process of generating measurable value streams from available data assets.
Yep.
So, I mean, to my mind, it's sort of unarguable, Robert. It just seems that it's another sort of King Canute moment, isn't it? It's people just sat there whilst the tide rises around them, saying, "Oh, I just don't quite get it. I just don't quite think about it." And you wonder how many more generational changes this generation can take before people just have to accept it. This is what's happening now. We need to be much more agile. We need to be much more open. It's about bringing people on the journey for with you, not just about data and AI, but about that whole mindset, that whole culture of change that is going on.
Yeah.
And it ticks boxes now. Data and AI it's not just this sort of crazy thing that can give you a picture of the Last Supper where everyone's got six fingers. It's it's actually more, and it's starting to get into the CFOs and say, well, we've been collecting this data for ages because we believed it was important for the business, because we wanted to better understand our customers. Now it turns out that if we do this correctly, we can monetize it. This is an asset on our books that exists. And if you're not monetizing it, then it's just surely a waste of time. So it feels very much part of, the wave is growing, isn't it? It's getting more and more powerful, and it's collecting every single part of the business as it moves through. And I did read somewhere that AI, I think, rather than the sort of the wider data units, but AI specifically, maybe amount to make a sort of serious breakthrough in kind of sales. And you think, well, if that happens, that's probably, you see lots of AI things offering, kind of like lead generation, but it's effectively sort of automating the stuff that the marketing and sales have done anyway. It's nothing new, but I think there's sort of some new breakthroughs coming through. That's it, isn't it? Is there any other part of the business that needs to be engulfed?
Well, here's the part of the business that needs to be considered. And that is something that I so appreciated about this conference, that it brought in so many people from different perspectives, not just the technology perspective and how do we build this stuff and how do we build it efficiently, but also how do we think about this stuff. That's why I really liked Doug McCraney's keynote. I wasn't familiar with his work before this conference, but as soon as I heard him speak, I went and bought his book, How Minds Change. And I so appreciated his point about how just gathering more data and making more data more accessible may not really help us, because maybe what we need is a culture that allows for more arguments about the data in a respectful and collaborative and constructive way, right? We don't need the arguments to be, combative. But oftentimes people don't change their minds, or they don't change their decisions just by being presented with more and more and more data. And I think that's a mindset that we need to be aware of and really build into business cultures to recognize, look, yes, there's technologies that make this data more accessible, easier to analyze and all of that kind of thing. But there's that cultural aspect where we need to foster conversations about it. And I really appreciated that message as well.
I thought Doug was excellent. His point, which I felt very strongly, that we like to think of ourselves as kind of intelligent decision making entities, but actually we're biased and lazy. And then he, in a really lovely and entertaining way, proved it. And the whole audience was like, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And it was deeply fascinating to watch. And and it's, we are kind of scooting around all the things. This is about bringing the people on the journey with you, and I
Yeah.
think you're exactly right. It's about, and maybe this is what the role, of the people is it is to discuss,
Yeah.
and in that way to kind of, to I guess really to sort of properly excavate the data and the purpose of it and the meaning of it, and to therefore work out how and where and why and when it affects the business, and how, where, and why and when it improves things for your customers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people say, and I did, as I said to you earlier, I checked this out afterwards on social media. A lot of people say it in many different ways. The business should not be driving the process of application. The business should be driving the process of application or
Hmm.
business solution creation, not data scientists.
Yeah.
But my concern, and the question that I wanted to share with you is but is the understanding in the business, to do that, and maybe if it isn't, then maybe setting up these discussion, these debating groups, these sort of, Doug's language, these kind of arguments, but these sensible, we argue, what did he say? We argue shoulder to shoulder rather than head to head.
Hmm. Yeah.
Maybe that's just a good
Exactly.
way of getting that understanding in the business.
Exactly. And I heard a term that I hadn't considered before. So I'm a consultant, and typically in what would be considered and described as business intelligence. But I heard some people talking about a different term called decision intelligence.
Mm.
Right. So the term business intelligence implies that we're just providing information from one group of people, one group of data experts to inform the business. Decision intelligence kind of switches gears in your mindset, I think, to indicate, you know, with your vocabulary, that the purpose of this is to make better decisions together. Um, Now, I wanted to come back to just a couple of things that you had mentioned briefly that I think are worth talking more about. This conference also included some discussions about AI ethics and just data ethics in general, privacy, governance, things that might be warning signs, which was your last main point. Um, there's a lot of value to open communication, open collaboration. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that certain things about customer privacy, data privacy, must still be considered within all of that. And what should these AI algorithms have access to? How do we make sure that things are still governed in a way that privacy um, is considered and protected? What kinds of things did you learn there?
Well, there's two maybe conflicting and interesting, for me, interesting. So I'll put them out, and you and your audience can decide whether or not they're actually interesting. Tammy Dokken spoke. She was the World Bank's first ever chief data privacy officer. She's now worked for many companies. She's now an advisor. She's an incredibly intelligent and very sort of articulate person, particularly on the area around data privacy. And she said, "I'm an expert in data privacy, and often I don't know exactly what's being said in a privacy notice." Now, genuinely, I think that's worrying, and I think that needs to be something that is fixed. I remember years ago somebody created a graphic novel. Do you remember this, of the Apple data privacy text? And it was sort of, I'm making it up, it was 300 pages. I don't know how long it was, but it was crazy because they wanted to prove in this actually incredibly exaggerated way how difficult these things are to get through. Now,
Yeah.
if data is the cornerstone of AI, and I think we can both sort of agree that it is,
Sure.
then what does that mean that someone who is an expert in data privacy doesn't know exactly what's being said in a privacy notice? And how many privacy notices do you click? How many cookies do you accept
Exactly.
because you are just, you need to get the info quick? how many times are you doing that a day? And then, you know, people worry about these things, and you get these enormous scams, and everybody's like, oh, you know, blah, blah. It strikes me at the moment we don't know where the responsibility and accountability should
Yeah.
sit, and maybe that's a conversation that needs to take place.
Yeah. But again, what I appreciated about this conference is that the conversation started to take place in a public way. Um, so I thought that that was wonderful. I wanted to ask you more about the conversations that you had with people attending. What kinds of impressions did you glean from the people who are interested in hearing these conversations and participating in these conversations? I'll start by saying my impression was the people that I met were leaders in a wide range of businesses in the data analytics space. People who have some influence in the decision making process for where is their company going to go when they're thinking about how do we implement AI, how do we point that at our data, what's a good way to do that, what's an ethical way to do that, what does it cost, what do we need to consider when we're making these decisions. So I met those decision makers, which is in contrast to what I experience at other conferences that are more like the Tableau conference, which happened just very recently, and I didn't get to go to this year, but normally do. Conferences like that are vendor specific. There's a lot of technology experts, a lot of people who are implementing and clicking the buttons and building the things. They're builders. My sense was that the people here were decision makers. But I think you talked to more of them than I did. You did several interviews. So what did you find about just the characteristic of the people who were participating?
I think that's exactly right, and I think they were curious, and maybe not. I don't know where does curious tip into converted. I don't know. A lot of conferences preach to the converted. This one didn't feel like it was necessarily preaching to the converted. It felt like it was preaching to people who were very considerate of the fact that they had businesses and of what this technology would mean and they wanted to find out exactly what was going to happen. And I think we have talked about that, bringing people along the journey with you was so important. And people were talking about their clients and saying that they have, I can't remember who it was, so forgive me, but I do remember talking to one lady, and she said her clients are really concerned about the ethics of AI, and they're really concerned about bias in
Mm-hmm.
AI. And so when she says, oh, we're starting to implement AI, they're actually talking to her and saying, we don't know if this is a good thing, because what we read is that, you know, AI is responsible for some horrendous judicial mistakes, and it's responsible for, for this, that, and the other. And I thought that was really curious. So that was why she was there. She said, I'm here because,
Yeah.
I want to see if this conversation is taking place, because she is she has a business to run. She's incredibly curious about what AI can do and how it can help her business. But she's also protective of, quite rightly, of course,
Yeah.
not only of the people that she works with, but the people that she works for her customers.
Those are great things to think about. And that actually reminds me of some points that I heard in one speaker who, I won't mention the name of the company, but this is a company that has just a massive repository of very specific kinds of documents. And they use AI as a search assistant and summary assistant for that body of documents. And they said that they recognize that people may have those hesitancies about AI, and so what they're doing is just presenting their normal familiar search box and using AI under the hood in more of an invisible way, and even um, choosing between different algorithms based on uh, the search criteria and whether they need a more efficient algorithm or more in-depth algorithm, so it can choose between, say, GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, depending on that. But the whole AI implementation is actually transparent to their users. They don't even know that it's AI under the hood. Um, maybe that's an okay approach. Maybe it's not. I mean, ultimately, they're still just searching their own documents that are protected in the same ways that any of their other solutions might be. But I hear you. I hear the same kinds of objections and concerns about AI. And going back to what we talked about, where AI does the fun stuff, it comes down to trust. And I think it takes a long, long time to build trust.
And
Jeff
not very
Bezos, I
long.
think, is famous for his quote that trust is very difficult to earn and very hard to earn back after it's broken.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was an unscheduled chat between Elena Yusinoff, who's at Human Feedback Foundation, Alistair Kroll, who's at the conference chair, and Shingai Manjengwa, who's the head of education at Chain ML, brilliant educationalist on kind of AI and stuff. And this gave me all the feelings, and I'm still not sure. And Elena said we must have recourse, which is exactly to your last point. We must have recourse, and we don't have it now, which is why we don't have trustworthy AI. And Alistair said, so there should be a legal statement. This thing involved AI, and therefore you should have recourse. Yeah. And Shingai said, no, people need to assume that AI is being used. And I don't know that.
Can we?
Yeah, I
don't think that we can assume that.
Yeah, exactly right. It feels like there's a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of people who are going to need to make that assumption, and I don't think that as wonderful and exciting as this is, and for a crowd of incredibly intelligent people in New York, and how fabulous that was for 2 days. It's a big wide old world out there, and I'm not sure that that everyone's just going to assume that if they use something, AI is being used, and therefore that the little weird things that happen. Look, I'm aware, Robert, that we're running time. There is one thing I would like to ask you, if you don't mind me asking you.
Go for it.
Which is, I was super fascinated by this user base of one thing. Okay. So it was Yana, you said it earlier, mentioned it. She said, and David Boyle talked about it as well. There's no single killer app. Think of creating many micro apps with a user base of one. Super Data Science podcast host John Crone was talking. He said you fine tune a pre-trained language model to your specific use cases. So go and make a chat GPT that's better for you. And I think this is amazing. I had no problem whatsoever. There were a couple of sessions dotted throughout the day that were about people using AI for societal benefit. Let's put it that way. For the bigger issues. Can we use it to save the whales? Can we use it to help the environment? All that sort of stuff. They weren't those topics, but they were that sort of way inclined. And they were less, the questions were less, the people were listening, but they were less kind of active in those sessions than the ones where it was about that user base of one thing. So I found this quite interesting, because you think we're an empathic race, and we're super, we're all aware, I think, that there are problems in the world at the moment. So we want to talk about, politically, wherever you sit on the spectrum, there's things you want to fix, whatever they might be. And there's this super brain coming along called AI. You can probably use it to fix whatever things you're interested in. So I asked ChatGPT about this. Is a user base of one, is this sort of more hyper-customized, hyper-personalized approach to AI development more of an American thing? Because I'm fascinated. I'm curious by this sort of thing. And ChatGPT said, yes, to some extent. There is a difference in focus between Chinese AI development, which tends to emphasize collective applications, and US AI development, which often prioritizes individual-centric applications. Robert, as an American and therefore representative of your entire nation. What do you think about that? How does that make you feel?
Let me put on my presidential tie and sport coat to speak for the whole of America here on this podcast. Um, I think my awareness of cultural distinctions is that you're onto something there. Um, you're right that in America, in the way in which we go about thinking about problems and solving problems, does tend to be more individualized, suiting to personal preferences than what you would find in China or many other cultures in the world. Um, and so that's just that's another reason why I so appreciate conferences like this that want to bring those kinds of conversations and awareness to the forefront, because we have to be aware of our own cultural influences, to understand that maybe the way we're going about this fails to consider something else that's just as important, which is we need to be able to collaborate. I don't want an algorithm that just gives me the answers that I'm personally looking for. I think we need technology and solutions and just really everything across the board that doesn't just help me, but helps the people that I'm working with, that helps solve the problems that we're trying to solve together as a corporation or as a nonprofit organization or what have you. Um, so that's why I appreciate you coming in from overseas, and even just building in that awareness that we don't see in most of the kinds of conferences that I've experienced. That's a great question. I love that this conference asks those kinds of questions. Um, it's something that I hope people listening to this will start to think about as well if they're involved in, how do we deliver data analytics? I think that collaborative aspect is so important, and I'll just go back to that point that David McCraney had made about we need to not just be using data to try to make our own personal individual argument. We need to be having back and forth collaborative discussions to argue together to find a greater solution.
Yeah, well, the presidential sports coat suited you well.
All right.
It was fantastic.
Thank you. Maybe I'll run in 4 years. The deadline is passed for this election, but we'll see. All right. Adam, thank you so much for this discussion. Is there anything else that you wanted to add from your experience at this conference?
Well, I wonder if there's a couple of things. So we talked about warning signs. I can just sort of do a quick roll call of these, but they might give your audience something to kind of, to sort of think about. These are what really resonated with me. They are random lines. I can give you a sort of sense of them, but nothing else.
All right, we'll call this our lightning round. Go for it.
Lightning round. Jana Eggers advised us to be excited about AI, but keep a healthy skepticism. She said, we need everyone to look at news as if it's April Fool's Day. That's
yes.
not particularly doable. I get it. But again, we're at this assumption that everything has AI in it. It's a bit bimodal. I think we need to bring more people along. Then she talks about 14% call center example, brilliant example. To put AI into a call center, AI chatbots, they resolved 14% more issues per hour, which is, if you're a business owner, that's crazy good economics. They improved customer sentiment. Wow. They increased employee retention. Fantastic. But they also improved similarity in responses. So how do we keep the human? How do we augment with AI? I think it's an ongoing conversation. It was certainly at Data Universe. I imagine it will be next year in 2025 as well. I thought that was just really interesting stuff. Peggy Tsai from Big ID wants to start a conversation, she said, about unstructured data quality metrics. And then she laughed and said, if anyone knows what they might be. And I thought, brilliant. So there's an area that we're still, very much up to explore. Serena Huang from Data with Serena got Gen AI to apologize. She asked it a question, it gave her an answer. She said, that's not actually the question I asked. And it apologized, but it suggested that perhaps she hadn't spoken correctly, which means that Gen AI has already led to the non-apology apology. And I thought that was, wow, that's incredible. And then Renee Cummings, who is professor at the University of Virginia School of Data Science. And I think this maybe for me sums up a lot of what I kind of got out of Data Universe. This is a fantastic time to be experimenting with AI for all of us, but it is imperative that we get inclusion, diversity, all that sort of stuff right now, so that AI works for all of us. And I do think, that kind of that feels right to me. And again, ignore if inclusion or diversity are words that make you feel uncomfortable, kind of ignore them. It's just about this needs to work for everybody. And for it to work for everybody, we need to have those conversations like you were talking about, Robert. We need to argue about the data. So maybe it all just does ultimately come back to people.
Exactly. Adam, those are all great quotes and great thoughts, not to end on, but to chew on. For the next year, as we anticipate the next set of conversations happening at Data Universe 2025. Maybe I'll be there. We'll see. If I am, I hope to see you again. This is a great conversation today. Adam, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
No worries, Robert. Really appreciate it. And it was lovely to meet you in person. Lovely to talk to you again now. So I hope to see you next year.
You as well.
Take care. Bye-bye.